And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television show that profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. Our episode this week comes to you from Empire Books and News of Pullman Square in downtown Huntington. Our guest this week is Frank Larnerd, and he was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, who spent much of his childhood engrossed in weird stories of monsters, mutants, and other worlds. He has worked as a morgue night watchman, a shoe salesman, and a color commentator for IWA East Coast Wrestling. And although he's best known for his unique blend of traditional Appalachian folklore and unsettling horror, Frank has also published numerous science fiction and crime stories. He currently studies professional writing at West Virginia State University, where he's received multiple awards for fiction and nonfiction, and he currently resides in Putnam County, West Virginia, and we're delighted to have him here. Frank, welcome, and thanks so much for being on Chapters.
Thanks for having me.
Let me ask you a little bit first before we get into some of your writing and some of your books. From Knoxville, Tennessee, how did you make it to West Virginia?
My mother and father got a divorce when I was 5. Thanks for bringing up the hard stuff. Yeah, let's go straight for the jugular.
That's right, start off with the somber moment.
Yeah, so my mom moved back to upstate New York, where her family is from, and remarried a couple years later, and then my stepfather brought us kids down to West Virginia, and I've lived here pretty much ever since.
Fantastic. Now, I want to ask you, too, about the information that I just shared with our audience in the bio about being a morgue night watchman, a shoe salesman, and a color commentator for IWA East Coast Wrestling. So I imagine in terms of fodder for writing and characters to base writing on and experiences to use in crafting plots for stories, having those 3 careers right there probably gave you a wealth of information and prior experience to draw upon. Which came first, the color commentator, the shoe salesman, the night watchman, or did some of those go together?
I was the shoe salesman first, and then kind of the night watchman and color commentator at the same time. But I've had all kinds of strange jobs. I've worked in plenty of bookstores and video stores and crazy corner markets and bars and restaurants, anything you can think of. I've had every kind of crappy, low-paying job that there is.
So tell us a little bit about the morgue night watchman. When was that? Who did you work for? What did you do?
This has been about 5 years ago. I worked for the medical examiner's office in Charleston, and basically I would come in at midnight and I would stay till 8 o'clock in the morning. The funny thing about the morgue is normally if you die and it doesn't seem suspicious, you just go to the funeral home. This is only when they need to investigate the body and try to uncover some crime. So I was in charge of accepting bodies in from the transport units, pushing them back to the cooler, logging their information, and then staying up with them all night long, alone in the dark.
And at the same time you're doing that, you mentioned that you're doing the IWA East Coast Wrestling.
Yeah.
How did you get started doing that, and what did you do for that?
IWA East Coast started as a bunch of friends of mine wanted to do their own kind of wrestling show. We had a friendship with Madman Pondo, who's kind of a famous international hardcore wrestler, and he was ran the show and was the booker, and we brought in people like Sabu and Big Van Vader and wrestling people from WWE and the past, and it was fun to do.
So let me ask you about how you got into writing, based on those great experiences that you had working a lot of different jobs. How did you get started into writing, and what was really the first moment or the first time that you realized to yourself that you wanted to be a writer?
I think that I've always been interested in telling stories. As a kid, I would, make up scenarios and play them out with my G.I. Joes. And in high school, I dabbled in a little bit of short stories and poetry, but never showed it to anybody or did anything with it. Later on, I got married. We were going to have a baby, and my wife said, "You're going to go back to college." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." My first semester there, I had an English course, and they required us to write a short story. At the same time, the school was doing a contest, and I figured I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone, get my homework done, and enter the contest. What could it hurt? I ended up winning first place and got a reward, and it was a great feeling. It was the first time anybody had ever looked at my writing and thought it was quality. So it really kind of made me feel like maybe I can do this. So I started to write more and more, and instead of just putting them in a box or never really finishing them. I would finish them up, I'd send them out, and I started to get published over and over again. And I figured this is the only chance really I have to kind of pursue this passion, and so I've kind of jumped in it with both feet and been doing it for about 4 years now. And I've been very, very lucky and to be a part of Woodland Press and do some editing and have my stories show up in all kinds of neat little venues, from magazines to internet to comic books.
And you mentioned the relationships that you formed as a writer with getting those stories published. You know, you've worked with Woodlands Press, as you mentioned. You've also had stories featured in works edited by Brian Hatcher, who's a pretty famous writer. Carl Hogues, who's also a pretty famous editor. Johnny Shaw and some others. What's it been like working with them, and how has that relationship helped you as a writer and an editor?
Well, I think that anytime you work with people that are better than you, you can always learn something from them. And these guys are just consummate professionals that are just leagues above most other writers, and they're so willing to share their experiences and their ideas. That really all you have to really do is just kind of hold onto the reins and go along for the ride and just try to learn as much as you can. But it's been a great experience.
Let me ask you about the genre that you tend to write in, which is this horror, science fiction / crime. When you pull those three apart, you can almost have separate genres there, but how does some of that bleed together? How does the crime work in with the science fiction, with the horror, to lead to a great story?
Well, I think that, most stories are a mix of multiple different things. And I'm interested in the darker side of life. And so that kind of compels me to write about monsters and weird stuff. And going along with that is, technology and invention, and also, just general craziness. And that's what I try to fill my stories with. I just try to make them as interesting and as bright and vibrant as I can.
Now, one of the stories that or one of the books, I should say, that you had a story featured in was Mountain Magic, Spellbinding Tales of Appalachia, edited by Brian Hatcher. Tell us a little bit about that collection, and what story did you have that was featured in that particular book?
Mountain Magic is published by Woodland Press, and it's a collection of 13 stories and poems, all based on the idea of magic in Appalachia. Magic is, different everywhere, and specifically here, magic is a lot of superstition, old wives' tales, curses, those kind of things. And so Brian kind of gave us writers a kind of free range to kind of cover those ideas. I did a story called Top Hat. When I was a kid growing up in Dunbar, we lived right by where they used to hold a carnival once a year. And these carnies would come into town, and they would always ask my folks to, if they could hook their water hoses up to the house. And I would always lay awake at night wondering what it would be like if I dove out the window and joined up with them and hit the road and became a carny. And so that story was kind of a way for me to explore those ideas. And it's about a boy who wants to become a magician's assistant, but first the magician has a test for him to see if he's kind of worthy. And it turned out to be a fun little story.
So let me ask you, too, about another story that you have in a collection called Dark Light. Tell us a little bit about that book and what kind of work you had featured in that particular collection.
Dark Light is a charity anthology for the Ronald McDonald House, and they were looking for writers that wanted to submit to that. My stepson Sebastian stayed at the Ronald McDonald House when he was a kid, and so I thought, well, this is the perfect way we can pay back a little bit. So I submitted a story called Dead Run. It's kind of based on a little bit on my morgue experience. It's about a body transporter, someone who takes the body from the scene to the morgue, and how they get a strange visitation on a lonely mountain road from the person driving in or laying in the back. So it's kind of a creep story.
Let me ask you, as you come up with these ideas for some of these creative stories, and I hope our readers will check some of these out, because not only your stories, but also the other stories in these collections, because they're so unique. What's your writing process like from the moment you get an inspiration or sort of that itch in your brain that you want to write about this? What's the process like? How do you draft? How do you write? How do you revise? And then where do you look for publication? Where are some of the places that you like to look and like to seek publication, maybe outside of Woodlands Press, other places and other venues that you target for publication with your stories?
I think I think for me, getting ideas is kind of like a businessman. You know, they're constantly looking for the next business venture or a way to make capital. As a writer, I'm kind of the same way. I'm always kind of got my radar open for where is this next story going to come from, and you never really know. Sometimes you'll be sitting in the waiting lobby of the mechanics, and you know a story will flash in there, or you're laying in the bathtub and you'll have a sudden burst of inspiration. So I'm never really sure exactly where they come from, but I like to keep my mind open and always be looking for them and being able to notice them when they do show up. Once they do, I have a pretty standard process. I write down all the names of the characters. I write down all the places that they go, and I do a literal map of how the graph of the story plot goes. So I know where the highs and the lows are in the story, and I can kind of plan accordingly. I don't flesh everything out so I know what happens on every page, but I have a general idea of where I'm headed, and I'm still open enough that when inspiration hits me or if I get a fresh idea, it can be plugged in there without upsetting kind of the whole thing. I have written some stories without kind of laying out the plot, but I tend to write myself in a corner, so it's good for me to kind of know where I'm headed. After I'm done with a story, they usually go through multiple revisions, sometimes 7 or 8 revisions. After I'm done with that, I look for markets that maybe won't necessarily pay very well, but if I like the people that are doing it, or if I think it sounds like a great project, that's where I submit my stuff. I do like to get paid, but first and foremost, I think that as a creative person, you should be having fun, and I don't want to be focused on money. I want to be focused on telling fun stories and having them go places where they can be run and play with all the other fun stories and people can enjoy them.
Let me ask you about the genre, too, of this horror, science fiction, crime that you dabble in and have written a lot of stories, kind of combining some of those elements together. Is this a genre or a subgenre that beginning writers will find there's plenty of opportunities for publication, or is this sort of like a mystery genre where there is so much out there and there's so many novels and stories being written in that genre that the market is a bit oversaturated and it's tough to break through? What are your thoughts for that with sort of the science fiction and horror writing area?
Well, this is the Wild West era of writing. With self-publishing and ebooks, all bets are off. And it really comes down to who's the quickest draw and the best shot. If you think your work is quality and you want to share it, you can find those good markets. You can break into them. They want you. They're begging for you. If you're not so good, you're going to find places that will help push you along and make you a better writer. I think that if you really want to write, this is the best time ever in human existence to be a writer. People are going to be able to find your work's going to be able to get seen, and it's really it's the best. It's the gold rush.
Yeah, it really is, and we do get some questions about that from time to time from viewers who watch the show. I watched writer so and so, and they were writing in this genre. Is this a genre where the ceiling is unlimited or the ceiling is really tight? But you say that because of there's so many options now to go for it. If you feel like
it doesn't matter. I mean, I think that if you were writing a book and you want to do a particular genre because you think it'll sell, that's a mistake. You should write what you think is fun, what you think is exciting or entertaining. Don't worry about the market. You'll never catch the market. By the time a book comes out, the market is already over. You know, if you're trying to catch Harry Potter now or catch Twilight, forget about it. We've all moved on since then, and it goes so fast. So just do the work that you think you'd enjoy, and then share it.
One of the most recent collections that has a story featured in it is Fed from the Blade, which was edited by Kat Pleska, who was also a guest here on Chapters. Talk to us a little bit about that project and some of the writers that were in there and what it was like working with her and what it was like working on your story for that publication.
Fed from the Blade is multiple stories and poems, all by West Virginia writers who are a member of the West Virginia Writers Incorporated group. It was open to anybody who was a member, and they had a blind submission reading, so you just kind of sent in your story. They picked the ones they liked the best, and then kind of checked and saw who wrote it then. I was really wanting to be a part of it because West Virginia Writers is a fantastic organization that is just the best about promoting and trying to help writers along. And I know there are so many terrific writers that are a part of it. I just had to be a part. So I wrote a little story. It's kind of a mystery thriller. and about a garbage man who finds something unusual in the trash that he doesn't think belongs there. And it sets in motion a series of events that kind of end in bloody murder. But I submitted the story. They accepted it, and I've been helping promote it by going out and doing some book signings. And it's just a fantastic book. You've got people like Jeff Fuller and Jason and Christina Roth. I mean, it's a fun book that's got a great mix of kind of Appalachian voices. What they're not all doing, crimey thriller things, but some of them are ghost stories, and some of them are funny, and some of them are romantic, and so it's a great look at the variety of writing that can come from West Virginia, and I encourage anybody to pick it up.
What would you say are some of the challenges, either personally or globally, to writing and the writing process? I know you mentioned you're going to school and you have a family, and I know those pressures oftentimes weigh on the time and the energy level to write. But what are some of your challenges as a writer, and what do you see as can be some of the global challenges of writing that can really trip up a writer that's maybe trying to get started in their career as a writer?
That's a good question. I think now more than ever it's easier to be a writer than ever before. Not just with computer programs that help you write the things, but research. Before you would have to go to a library and do all this research. Now it's just literally a Google search away. And so you can write compelling things that are realistic and are grounded in reality. So all that is really easy. But for me, I think the challenge is, I know a lot of writers are afraid politically to say things sometimes that they feel, and are afraid to dabble in stories that they think may offend people. I think that's a real detriment to the craft. I think that even if, not everybody's always going to be happy with every story, but if you write from the heart, and you're going to make something worthwhile. And I think a lot of people sometimes pull back because they think, oh, the NSA is watching me, or what will my grandmother think? Mm-hmm. And that's just a mistake. So this idea that writers have to be constrained and censored, I think is probably the biggest stumbling block in today's writing. And if I would tell any young writer to not do that, just follow their heart and write what they want to write, and let the chips fall.
Who are some writers that you read on a consistent basis, and what writers have influenced your work?
No surprise, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King, but I'm also a big fan of William Gaines, who used to be the editor and main writer for EC Comics. He's been a huge influence on my work. I like a lot of the horror greats, Clive Barker, Robert R. McCammon, and I like some of the lesser-known guys, Manly Wade Wellman, Philip Jose Farmer. I think, I'm a big kind of trash reader. I like punchy action-adventure stories that move and are exciting to read, and I bore easily, so I want there to be something to happen, and I try to do that in my own work. People, you don't want to read, a 400-word story where nothing happens, and it's just a bunch of people talking. I want explosions and monsters and mutants and chainsaws, and, something fun, So that's what I do.
What are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading Polybus and a History of Ancient Rome. Yeah, go figure. One of the things I'm interested in is history, and I'm toying with the idea of maybe doing a novel set in ancient Rome with the Emperor Claudius. It's kind of in the planning stages, so I don't know if it'll ever happen, but that's what I'm reading currently.
Okay, very good. And that sort of leads into the next question I was going to ask you, which is, what are you thinking about working on in the future? Obviously, you kicking around the idea of the Rome book featuring Claudius. Anything else that you're considering working on, or that you've got maybe in the early stages?
Well, I'm primarily a short story writer, so there are always brand new markets that are looking for short stories. But I think I've reached a point in my career now where I need to expand. So I'm finishing up my first novella. It's a Appalachian sci-fi UFO extravaganza, and doing a couple new comic book stories, and just trying to have fun.
Tell me a little bit about the transition, or if there is much of one, from doing the short story to doing sort of the comic book story? I know some of the elements are similar there. What are the similarities and differences from writing more of a traditional short story that maybe would be in a collection like Fed from the Blade, as opposed to writing a story that may be in a comic book?
Oh, I think the essentials are all still there. I mean, you still have characters who have needs, and you have opposition to those needs, and that's what makes a story. But the format is so entirely different. A comic book script is a lot like a film script. So it's what characters say, and it's what characters do. All the flourish of beautiful language that's usually in prose doesn't exist in those scripts, because they're laid out for what happens on the page. So in that respect, they're totally different. You don't have to be a wordsmith to write a comic book story. You still have to know about plot. You still have to know about character. You still have to be able to write decent dialogue and whatever action scenes are happening. But you don't have to strangle yourself with this idea that you have to be some kind of poetic, wordsmith out there.
Now, do you do your own illustrations for those comic stories, or is there an illustrator you work with?
No, don't do my own. Those guys are always hired out. A lot of them come from South America, and they do fantastic work. But I'm always open up for working with somebody new.
And I imagine that's got to be something that's so interesting, is that you can collaborate because of technologies you were talking about with ebooks and self-publishing and things, that you can work with somebody literally on the other side of the earth, and to work on a book project and maybe not even see that person or meet with that person very often, which
Just
I think
all
is
through emails,
I think is a real unique feature. Frank, in our final moments here, if one of our viewers would like to get in contact with you, talk to you about writing, or if they would like to get copies of your books, how can they do that, and where can they find some of the anthologies where your works are featured?
You can go to www.franklarnerd.com, and there's contact information there. It's got a list of all my books. If you're local, you can visit Empire Books or Books A Million in Huntington and Charleston, and even some drug emporiums around town carry copies of things that I'm in.
Fantastic. Well, Frank, we really appreciate having you on. Congratulations on all of the works that we've talked about here that have work that you've done featured in them, and best of luck to you in your career, and we will certainly keep tabs on how you're doing as your work continues to get published. So thank you so much, and thanks for being on Chapters.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we want to say a special thanks to our friends and the staff and management at Empire Books and News here at Pullman Square for providing our studio taping space for this episode of Chapters. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News to pick up any of Frank's works or any of the other authors that you've seen featured here on this Chapters program. Much of their work is on sale and available for you and to you right here at Empire Books and News. Plus, if you like magazines, Empire Books and News has the largest selection of magazines in the tri-state region. So we encourage you to stop by, talk to Charlotte and her staff, and let them help you find the reading material you're looking for here at Empire Books and News at Pullman Square in Huntington. And we want to thank them so much for sponsoring our show this week. And finally, if you have a question, comment, or story suggestion about this Chapters program or any Chapters program you've seen here on Armstrong Cable, we'd like to hear from you. You can send us an email to the address that appears right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We appreciate all the feedback and comments that we get, so keep those coming here to Chapters. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time, and in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.